This is White Plains Week, the weekly news roundup. With your moderator, John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter. Jim Benaroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And Peter Katz, noted broadcaster and journalist. White Plains Week. What's happened? Who are the newsmakers? And what's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, and all you newsmakers out there. We know who you are, and that's unfortunate for some of you. At any rate, this is White Plains Week, the City News Roundup show for the next to last week of 2015. Seems like we just started, all right? And I'm with, of course, Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons, and Jim Benaroff, our partner the last 15 years, is on assignment tonight. And let's start with the headlines. Peter.
All right, John, and here are the headlines for the White Plains Week program being recorded December 18th, 2015. Climate change comes to Westchester and the world and White Plains, and all you have to do is look at the thermometer as 112 nations agree to action on curtailing emissions that are contributing to global warming. The county legislature passes an optimistic budget, no tax increase for the 6th consecutive year, but sales tax revenues are down somewhat, and that may require them to draw down the fund balance in order to balance the new budget. The National Transportation Safety Board has released documents on the February 3rd, 2015 crash at the Valhalla crossing. I'll have a report on what's in their docket. White Plains brings back the position of Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety after 6 years of going without having filled the position. Grid Properties moves ahead with its Boulevard Fitness Mall and townhouses, and they get a positive reaction from the Planning Board. Westchester County will shut down the Bronx River Parkway southbound at the county center this coming weekend. The school district here in White Plains considers equipping 5 schools with solar panels to generate electricity, but they table the issue until January. Pets Alive agrees to return its pet shelter property to the town of Greenburgh so that Greenburgh can arrange for a new volunteer organization to run a pet shelter. Winterfest continues this weekend through Sunday here in White Plains. It's at Court Street and Renaissance Square. Tarzan, the musical, comes to the White Plains Performing Arts Center. And Star Wars has come to movie theaters all over the place. May the Force be with you, John.
And the Force is with you right now here on White Plains Week. And we start off with the first of our Rollo Newsreel March of Time, and we are looking at buds on rhododendrons that came out last Monday. That's what they look like when they bloom in the spring.
It seems as if some plants are being fooled by the warm weather. Now, except for this coming weekend when the temperature is expected to go down into the 40s during the day. We have been enjoying very mild weather in the high 50s. Mild. And the forecast for Christmas Day coming up is for the temperature to reach the high 60s, perhaps as high as 68, and maybe even 70 degrees.
Right, the first 7-day weather forecast ever. But at any rate, this really is, the reason I put this first was because of the real real amazing agreement that was reached at Paris last week. Want to tell us about it, Peter?
Indeed, last Saturday, representatives attending a world conference in Paris on climate change approved an agreement which creates a framework for dealing with the problem and requires each country to set goals for protecting the environment and to limit and reduce the output of greenhouse gases. It requires developed countries to come up with $100 billion each year to help undeveloped countries combat climate change. President Obama attended the Paris conference prior to the final agreement being worked out and spoke about the agreement back at the White House.
No agreement is perfect, including this one. Negotiations that involve nearly 200 nations are always challenging. Even if all the initial targets set in Paris are met, we'll only be part of the way there when it comes to reducing carbon from the atmosphere. So we cannot be complacent because of today's agreement. The problem's not solved because of this accord. But make no mistake, the Paris Agreement establishes the enduring framework the world needs to solve the climate crisis. It creates the mechanism, the architecture, for us to continually tackle this problem in an effective way.
Now, the agreement seeks to hold the increase in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius above what the average temperature of the globe had been before the industrial age. But none of the plans which were proposed by the participating countries would actually achieve that goal. And the agreement did not come up with a way to punish those countries which deliberately violate the agreement. But the agreement does at least represent a start at an international effort to end global warming. And it further is pretty solid evidence that, in the opinion of all those countries participating, global warming is real.
Yes, but you know, Peter, the president makes a good point. There is a lot to be done to implement and bring down emissions. For example, I think they have to take each country that signed this agreement, figure out what their current contribution of emissions to the environment is, and set targets for each of them.
That's all part.
it.
That's all part of
Yeah.
what they actually will be doing as this agreement is put into effect.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that there still are some naysayers, and you may hear some of this as the presidential campaign continues to roll on in this country, who insist that there is no such thing as global warming, and that this climate change is just the normal ebb and flow of what Mother Nature has prepared. This
They
puts,
got to
it-
use
it-
their
it
eyes.
gives this,
Yeah.
in my opinion, gives absolute legitimacy
Yeah.
to the issue.
Yes, about time too.
And we also have to look at the plants and see how nature is really handling this, because if you look again at the buds on your rhododendron, when we have buds on ours too, and in fact there are some trees that
buds,
that appear to be budding already. You can see that there are changes taking
They
place.
think it's spring. They think it's spring, but I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to them if it suddenly gets sharply colder for a long time.
Well,
for like a month or so.
The long-range forecast indicates that perhaps January and February will be closer to normal. But nonetheless, this past year, this past November, has been the warmest November ever recorded.
I know. It was. It really was. But now, and more government news. The National Transportation Safety Board made very big news this week on that horrible railroad accident at the beginning of the year around February.
Well, the way the NTSB conducts its investigations is that it gathers the facts. It gathers a lot of information. It has a lot of preliminary reports prepared, and it assembles all of this material into what's called a docket. And generally speaking, and this is one accident where the generally speaking holds true, the docket becomes public at some point in time. And so what they did this week was to release approximately 1,000 pages of documentation gathered in the public docket on this accident. Now, they did not.
There it is.
They did not come up with any opinion. They did not come up with a probable cause. This was strictly a release of documents containing facts as gathered to date. This is an aerial photograph of the crossing at Commerce Street onto the Taconic State Parkway. And this is where the accident occurred. In the accident, there was an SUV which was struck by a northbound Metro North train, and a fire erupted. There were 5 people on board the train who were killed, and the woman who was driving the SUV was killed. And in the docket, there are things such as photographs which are taken, and I'm holding up one here, which is a photograph which previously had not been released of the vehicle which was hit. And if you look at the bottom of the photograph, you can see that a piece of the third rail actually penetrated that vehicle. There was, as you can see from the photograph, a rather intense fire which broke out. The rear tires of the SUV were completely melted away. And the woman who was in the car, of course, was killed in the accident. Some of the other things which were in the docket which was released included emails between various governmental agencies
Really?
discussing the crossing and discussing
Unredacted, probably.
discussing some of the investigations which they had been doing to try to see what deficiencies there may or may not have been in the crossing equipment, the gate and the lights, and the triggering mechanism, so that as a train approaches, the signals go on and the gate comes down to try to keep traffic off of the tracks. It included transcripts of interviews with witnesses. For example, one of them involved a fellow named William Marshall, who was riding in the first car of the Metro North train which hit the SUV. And he describes in the interview with the NTSB very graphically what he witnessed in the first car as pieces of the third rail penetrated the bottom of the car, causing a fire to erupt. And he described how they helped some of the victims, some of the people who had been instantly injured when the accident took place, get out of that car as the fire continued to spread. The NTSB also included an interview with the husband of the woman who was driving the car. His name was Alan Boyd, and his wife was driving the Mercedes SUV, which was struck. And interestingly, he worked for a railroad in Africa in his youth, and so he said that while he was working for this railroad in Africa, their policy was to never trust the crossing gates or the crossing lights, and to always use caution and to slow down the train as they approached any kind of railroad crossing in Africa. That's just a bit of irony that he would have such background.
Yeah.
He said, of course, that his wife had no knowledge of railroads, and so to her, and he felt this may even have been her first experience at a grade crossing.
There aren't many in Westchester.
To her, he said this was really a unique physical environment that she had entered into. So there are a few things which stand out in the public docket that the NTSB released, and one of the most outstanding things that they discovered, in my mind, is that apparently some of the signage to warn people of the grade crossing was not meeting federal standards at the time. It may have been meeting state standards at the time the signage was installed, but time changes things. And
NTSB very thorough in looking at these
the
things.
federal government updated its requirements for signage at railroad grade crossings. And apparently the signs there were not updated to meet the new federal standards. Now, part of what they have yet to determine is just who would have jurisdiction and whether the updating to the new federal standards would have been mandatory. They also found, interestingly, that the markings on the pavement, a stop line, which was put in, you've been to any intersections where there's a stop line.
Before the crossing.
Apparently it was not put in the correct place. According to what the NTSB had in the public docket, the stop line was put immediately below where the crossing gate came down. In actual fact, according to federal standards, it should have been far in advance of where the crossing gate came down, so that as you approach it, you know that you have to stop well before the crossing gate. And we do know from the facts gathered by the NTSB that the crossing gate came down on the woman's SUV.
Yeah.
And that, according to one witness, caused her to get out of the car to examine, to look for damage, and then she got back in the car, and shortly thereafter the train came barreling along.
Right. Now, did you want to say something about the traffic signals, too?
There is one other question, which it's a rather complex issue, but at that Commerce Street intersection, there is supposed to be a priority system, so that as a train approaches, any traffic lights which have gone red and force people to stop on the tracks will turn green to clear out any cars which may be backed up into the crossing gate area.
This was supposed to be done about 2009, this went into effect?
There is actually it will be long before that, but there is a question as to just how the priorities of the traffic signals were set up, and whether the traffic signals, the traffic lights on the roads in the area, on Commerce Street and the Taconic and any other roads in that area, were prioritized so that as a train approaches, the approaching of the train overrides any additional programming of the traffic lights and causes them
fail-safe to
go green in the direction that will clear traffic from the crossing.
Right. The next
that is something which I think the NTSB will be focusing on when it does its final report, which is many months off at this point, and when they adopt what's called the probable cause, where they say we believe the accident was caused by X, Y, and Z.
Right. Now, coming back down to the county level now, the county legislature, surprised, passed the budget on Monday.
This is a $1.8 billion county budget.
Right, and there's no tax increase for the 6th consecutive year.
That's Astorino's, the county executive's pledge again, and so that stays as was.
Man who never saw the tax increase he liked. But the sales tax revenues, as we have reported all through 2015, are just not robust at all. However, the budget that the legislators approved by a vote of 10-7, Mr. Kaplowitz, the chair of the Board of Legislators, voting for it, the budget anticipates a $25 million increase in sales tax revenues as part of the new 1.8
which may not be there, and for those of you
it's a 5% increase.
For those of you who watch this program regularly, you'll know that we pointed out, well, the county is sitting on over $100 million in the bank in a reserve fund, so why don't they just draw down some of the reserve fund to take care of any shortfall in this budget? And apparently that's what they're going to do.
That's what they're going to do if they fall short, and this, I guess, will be the second year they do it.
Yep.
But I just don't understand why you would and think that sales tax revenues are going to go up 5%. They have not. We haven't had a 5% increase in years.
We will know for sure what's going to happen after this holiday shopping season.
Yes. Now, the shocker of the week is that on the agenda on the December 7th meeting of the Common Council, your reporter was in such a Christmas spirit that I didn't look really hard at the agenda, and neither did a lot of people, because I refer to item 48, communication. Sounds innocent enough, doesn't it? Communication from personnel officer in relation to amendments to the municipal code. Sounds like a routine thing. But then you go to the backup material, which is the next slide.
Well, what it is, it's one of those usual things which they do on the agenda, which obfuscates what they're really doing.
Right.
So you can't find out what they're really doing unless
But
you
what
do what
they
John
did,
did, which is to
yes.
look at the backup material,
Right.
and then you might
And
might
it
learn something.
says that the position is rather big. It is
a deputy commissioner of public safety. Now, there had been a deputy commissioner of public safety up until about 6 years ago when it
Right.
was eliminated.
Right.
We've gotten along without it for 6 years now, so the question is, why now?
Why now?
Is this being added back in?
That's
Is something happening?
$180,000.
Does the public safety department need someone to concentrate on things like terrorism? Have there been changes in what they do in the way of policing? What has caused this?
But this
Now,
was
if
not
you-
mentioned
if
at
you-
all.
if
There
you
was
watch-
no explanation
If you
for
watch
it.
the Common Council meeting, you have no knowledge
No,
whatsoever
absolutely not.
of what they were doing.
This is government secrecy. This is transparency at its most dense.
Anyway, so now the question is, who is going to become the Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety?
Well, there's a lot of rumors and a lot of sources saying that this gentleman, James Bradley, the police chief, and a man who has worked for White Plains for 41 years in the police department, with certainly a tremendous wealth of experience, may very well get the position.
Well,
But
you'd
we
think
don't know
by
yet.
virtue of position and experience,
Yeah,
he
right.
certainly would be qualified and in line to do that. But just who they have in mind, we don't know.
No.
The question is, should it go to Bradley and then he moves up, do they then fill his position? Or is that position eliminated?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Now, over at the planning board, the Tuesday night, Mark Weingarten told me at the Thompson and Bender Christmas party, that's the public relations agency, that they had a really good evening with the planning board. They explained the Grid Properties Project Boulevard.
This is on Post Road,
That's right.
at the just
And-
below the Scarsdale line.
And also, one of the principals of Grid Properties, Drew Greenwald, on the right, explained that there is just tremendous interest in this, and all the parking will be free. The townhouses on the Maple Avenue side will have the windows, the bedroom windows, broadside instead of perpendicular in the development. They will be horizontal, completely new concept, sort of Georgian. And the planning department was quite taken with it.
Or the planning board
yes,
was.
planning board.
Yeah.
The one woman said, "This looks like it's from another planet." That's a quote, in a positive way. And it also is a first fitness mall of its kind. He has a lot of interest.
Well, Grid Properties, they're professionals. They know what they're doing. They know
They
what
did
kind
Harlem,
of malls
USA,
might work.
which
I wouldn't necessarily, build a fitness mall myself if I were building a property, but they supposedly know what they're doing.
I'm surprised being fitness one of your keen interests, Peter.
Yeah, actually, one of my other interests is pets. And there was
Right.
some news this week over in Greenberg where Pets Alive, the outfit that had been running the Elmsford Animal Shelter, and moved out basically to Middletown, their other facility, has now determined that they are going to give back the property, which it's behind where Sam's Club is,
Right. And who's taking it over?
They're going to give it back to the town of Greenburgh so that Greenburgh can then work with another nonprofit to reopen the shelter and keep it going. This Pets Alive group said that they wanted to sell off the property for perhaps $5 or $6 million to a commercial developer, and they were basically blocked from doing that. So now this property will continue to operate in the future as an animal shelter, which is good news for animals.
We
who
have a
need shelter.
traffic note for everybody. Yesterday, December the 17th, the county said that they were closing the Bronx River Parkway southbound, beginning at the county center, CC, up in the left-hand corner there, and all the way down to Ardsley Road, southbound on the Bronx River Parkway. It begins tonight, Friday night, and I am really flabbergasted that they would close this main north-south way to White Plains.
Some reports suggest that they need to finish work on a bridge and get that done. Other reports suggest that they're also going to be planting some trees along there.
Landscaping, right. No access from the southbound Bronx River Parkway in White Plains, south of the county center. All traffic diverted onto Central Park Avenue south to Sprainbrook Parkway, and entrances to the southbound Bronx River Parkway at Main Street and Fenimore Road will be closed. Make that traffic note.
But hey, you know, we need the ability for people to get into White Plains to do their Christmas shopping with minimum hassle. Why would you do this on the weekend before Christmas?
It's government. What else would you expect? When would they show you that we're working while you're trying to shop?
Well, you know, you really don't want to interfere with people coming to White Plains to shop.
That.
I mean, our sales tax needs it. Our parking revenues need it.
This is not smart. It's stupid. I'm sorry. Do it another time.
Anyway,
the school district considers equipping 5 schools with solar panels.
Right. We don't know too much about this. For example, we don't know how much electricity these solar panels will generate. We don't know who will be getting revenue from selling excess generation capacity
when
back
the schools
to the grid.
aren't operating.
We don't know how this is going to be useful when you have schools which are closed on Saturday and Sunday, but the solar panels are still going to be generating electricity.
And those are the schools on the left that are going to be eligible for it.
And they also, schools are closed during the summer, which is a great time to be generating solar power. So what is this set up to be? Is it set up to be a revenue stream for the school district?
It's only supposed to save $335,200 over 18 years. 11 is wrong.
The school district having to buy electricity from someone else. We don't even know who they're going to be buying from.
But that seems incredibly low. Incredibly low. Why do it?
It seems to me that there are a lot of details to this plan that we just don't know and have not been made public.
And that's why they tabled it until January. John Bailey saying see you on the radio on WVOX, and good night for Jim Benroff and Peter Katz, White Plains Week.
White Plains Week has been a presentation of White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com, in cooperation with Channel 76. Comments may be emailed to WPCNR@AOL.com. The copyrighted print White Plains Cityscape by Leonard Weber is used courtesy of the White Plains Presbyterian Church. For information on its availability, you may contact the church at 761-8585. The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. For White Plains Week, this is Seth Benaroff speaking.